the marble floors of the Bennett mansion were polished to such a high shine that they looked like frozen water, cold and unforgiving. To 10-year-old twins, Leo and Jax, this house wasn't a home? It was a museum where they were the most expensive, and most neglected, exhibits. Their father, Elias, moved through the hallways like a ghost haunted by his own net worth. He provided them with high-end tutors, the latest gaming consoles, and a trust fund that could buy a small island, yet the one thing the boys truly craved, his gaze, was always fixed on a glowing smartphone screen. The boys responded to this emotional vacuum with a specific kind of calculated wreckage. They didn't just misbehave, they waged war. They were testing the world, trying to see if anyone would care enough to stop them. 10 nannies had already fled, citing uncontrollable aggression and lack of respect. Then came Maya. She didn't arrive with a resume full of elite certifications or a background in child psychology. She arrived with a quiet, bog-grounded presence that felt like the earth beneath one's feet. Her first day was a scene that had become a ritual in the Bennett household. The twins had overturned a massive tray of expensive paints, turning the ivory rug in the sunroom into a chaotic smear of blues and reds. They stood in the center of the mess, chins tucked, daring Maya to scream so they could feel the familiar spark of conflict. Maya didn't scream. She didn't even sigh. She simply took off her shoes, stepped onto the unsoiled edge of the rug, and sat down. "That's a lot of blue," she said softly, looking at the mess as if it were a map. "It looks like the ocean during a storm. Is that where we are today? In a storm?" The twins looked at each other, their practiced defense mechanisms failing. For the first time in years, an adult wasn't looking at the damage or the cost of the rug. She was looking at the state of their hearts. Maya began to pick up the brushes, not to clean, but to move the paint into intentional shapes. She sat on the floor with them, a simple act of physical leveling that Elias hadn't done since their mother left. By sitting on the floor, Maya communicated that she wasn't above them, she was with them. Over the next few weeks, the power of presence began to dismantle the walls of the mansion. Maya's magic was actually just radical attention. When Leo had a nightmare, she didn't just send him back to bed with a glass of water. She sat in the hallway and talked to him about the monsters until they turned into shadows. When Jack struggled with his homework, she didn't hire a tutor. She sat beside him and admitted she didn't know the answer either, so they'd find it together. The turning point occurred when Elias returned from a 3-day business trip to find the house eerily quiet. He walked toward the kitchen, expecting to hear the usual sounds of slamming doors or his son's defiant shouting. Instead, he heard a low, melodic hum. He peered around the corner and saw Maya at the kitchen island, showing the boys how to knead bread. The boys were covered in flour, their faces glowing with a kind of light Elias hadn't seen in years. They weren't just making bread, they were being seen. Maya was listening to Jax tell a rambling story about a bug he found in the garden, nodding with genuine interest. Elias realized then that his money had been a barrier, not a bridge. He had been providing for them, but Maya was providing to them. She had proven that a child's soul doesn't feed on gold, it feeds on the simple, unhurried presence of a person who is willing to sit in the mess until the sun comes out. Maya hadn't changed the boys. She had simply stayed long enough for them to remember who they were. The Bennett mansion was a place of high ceilings and even higher tension. For years, the sound of the house had been a constant roar. The twins screaming in defiance, nannies shrieking for order, and Elias's booming voice trying to command a respect that he never took the time to earn. Every adult who entered that house arrived with a whistle, a clipboard of rules, and a loud voice. They believed that to control chaos, you had to be louder than the storm. Then came Maya, and with her, the silence began. Maya's authority was not a weapon, it was a wall. It didn't move, it didn't shout, and it certainly didn't break. On her third day, Jax decided to test the limits of this new peace. During lunch, he picked up a crystal glass of juice and, looking Maya directly in the eyes, tipped it over. The dark purple liquid soaked into the white linen tablecloth, spreading like a bruise. In the past, this would have triggered a symphony of gasps and lectures. Instead, Maya didn't even flinch. She didn't scold him, she didn't tell him how expensive the linen was. She simply stopped eating, stood up, and removed his plate. "What are you doing?" Jax demanded, his voice rising. "I'm not finished." We don't eat at a table where we don't respect the space, Maya said. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, yet it cut through the room more effectively than a scream. It was the sound of a calm sea, beautiful, but suggesting a depth you couldn't move. When you are ready to help me clean this, you may have your lunch back. Until then, the kitchen is closed. She walked away. She didn't look back to see his reaction. She didn't engage in the "why did you do that?" argument that Jax was so prepared to win. He sat there for 40 minutes. Vibrating with rage, waiting for the lecture that never came. The silence was unnerving. It forced him to sit with the mess he had made. Eventually, the hunger and the eerie quiet broke him. He walked into the kitchen, grabbed a towel, and started dabbing at the stain. Maya joined him instantly, working in total silence, showing him the technique without a single "I told you so." This was the silent authority. Maya understood that the boys used chaos as a shield. When she refused to be chaotic, they were left standing exposed. Her consistency was her greatest strength. If she said bedtime was at 8, she didn't argue at 8:05. She simply turned off the Wi-Fi and sat in the living room with a book. No threats, no counting to 3, just a boundary as solid as the mansion's foundation. Elias watched this from the periphery of his busy life, fascinated and slightly intimidated. He was a man who ruled through memos and mandates. He watched Maya one evening when Leo was having a full-blown meltdown because he couldn't find a specific toy. The boy was throwing cushions, his face purple with effort. Maya sat in a nearby chair. Breathing deeply, her posture relaxed. She didn't try to talk over his crying, she waited. When the boy finally ran out of breath and slumped onto the floor, she spoke. "Are you finished?" "Because I have something very interesting to show you in the garden, but I can't hear myself think while you're yelling." Leo looked up, exhausted. The silent authority had won again. Not because she had crushed his spirit, but because she had offered him a center of gravity. In a world where their mother had vanished and their father was a ghost, the boys were desperate for something that wouldn't move when they pushed it. Was that something? She proved that you don't need to roar to be a lion. Sometimes, the most powerful person in the room is the one who refuses to add to the noise. By the end of the month, the mansion wasn't just quieter. It was finally at peace. The chaos hadn't been defeated. It had simply been invited to be still. The Bennett mansion was a graveyard of memories, kept meticulously clean, but devoid of life. For 3 years, Elias had operated on a simple, cold logic. If something is broken, buy a newer version. If someone is hurting, increase their allowance. He treated grief like a bad investment, burying it under layers of work and expensive distractions. He was a checkbook father. A man who believed that as long as the school fees were paid and the fridge was full, he was doing his job, but the boys didn't need his money. They needed his heartbeat. Maya saw this the moment she walked in. She saw the way Elias would stand at the door of his son's playroom, checking his watch, never stepping over the threshold. He was a man afraid of the wreckage his wife had left behind, so he stayed in the hallway, safe and distant. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. Elias was preparing to leave for a gala, adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror, when he heard a crash from the kitchen. He rushed in to find a shattered jar of preserves and Maya standing over it, her arms crossed. Leo and Jax were nowhere to be seen. But the tension in the room was thick. "I'll have the cleaning crew take care of this in the morning," Elias said, already reaching for his phone to call his assistant. "And tell the boys I'll buy them whatever game they were fighting over. Just make sure they're quiet." Maya didn't move. She didn't look at the mess. She looked at him. "You're going to buy them another game, Mr. Bennett. That's your solution for everything, isn't it? A new toy to fill a hole that's the size of a father." Elias stiffened. "I provide for this family, Maya. I work 18 hours a day so they never have to want for anything. They want for you," Maya said, her voice dropping to a low serrated edge. "They are drowning in silence, and you're throwing them gold coins instead of a life jacket. They don't need a checkbook. They need a man who isn't afraid to look at them and see that they're hurting just as much as he is. You're not protecting them by staying busy, Elias. You're just teaching them how to be ghosts." The checkbook father tried to speak, to defend his fortress of productivity, but the words died in his throat. Maya had stripped away the prestige and the bank balance, leaving only a grieving man who had forgotten how to be a dad. That night, Elias didn't go to the gala. He took off his suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He went into the playroom and sat down on the floor. He didn't bring a gift, he didn't bring an apology, he just brought himself. The boys were wary at first. They watched him like he was a predator in their territory. But Elias didn't leave. He picked up a stray toy and waited. It took an hour before Jax crawled over and sat near his knee. It took 2 hours before Leo asked him a question. Maya watched from the doorway, invisible in the shadows. She saw the cycle of grief begin to crack. The healing wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow thaw. It was Elias realizing that his presence was the only currency that actually mattered. He began to cancel meetings to make it to soccer practices. He stopped checking his watch during dinner. By the time a month had passed, the checkbook father was gone. In his place was a parent who knew the names of his son's friends and the specific way they liked their toast. Maya hadn't just cleaned the house. She had cleared the path for a father to finally come home. The courtroom felt more like a stage than a place of law. On one side sat Vanessa, the boy's biological mother, looking like a portrait of perfection. She was draped in designer silk, her hair polished into a stiff, expensive wave, and her skin glowing with the kind of radiance only high-end clinics can provide. She carried herself with the air of someone who believed that her status, her last name, her social standing, and her appearance, was an undeniable argument for her right to lead a family. On the other side sat Maya. She wore a simple, charcoal-colored suit she had borrowed for the occasion. There were no diamonds around her neck, and her hands, though clean, bore the faint marks of a woman who actually worked, small burns from the stove and the subtle roughness of someone who scrubbed floors. To the casual observer, the contrast was stark. The elite versus the help. But as the hearing began, the thin veneer of superficial status started to crack under the weight of genuine substance. Vanessa's attorney spoke first, painting a picture of a mother who had found herself and was now ready to provide her sons with a life of luxury and social connections. He spoke of elite boarding schools and summering in the Hamptons. He spoke of the Bennett legacy. He spoke of everything money could buy, but he didn't speak of the boys. Then, Maya was called to the stand. Vanessa's lawyer tried to diminish her immediately. "You're just the housekeeper, correct? A temporary employee?" Maya sat tall, her gaze steady. "I am the person who holds them when they cry," she said, her voice echoing through the silent room. "I don't just clean the house. I help maintain the hearts inside it." The lawyer smirked. "And I'm sure you think you know them well. Tell me, what is Leo's favorite subject in school?" Vanessa leaned forward, a practiced smile on her face. But when Maya answered, the smile faltered. "Leo doesn't have a favorite subject," Maya said clearly. "He has a favorite teacher, Mr. Henderson, because Mr. Henderson lets him draw in the margins of his notebook when he's anxious. And Jax doesn't want to go to a boarding school in the Hamptons. He wants to stay in Atlanta because he's spent 3 months training the neighbor's stray cat to eat from his hand, and he's afraid the cat will go hungry if he leaves." The room went deathly quiet. Vanessa blinked, her eyes darting to her lawyers. She didn't know about the cat, she didn't know about Mr. Henderson. She knew the cost of their tuition, but Maya knew the cost of their silence. "A guardian isn't a title you wear like a designer coat," Maya continued, looking directly at the judge. "It's a verb. It's the act of showing up at 3 a.m. when a nightmare hits. It's the shame that Jax hates the texture of onions, and that Leo needs his pillows stacked a certain way to feel safe. Status can buy a house, but only substance can build a home." The judge looked at Vanessa. "Do you know the name of the cat, Ms. Bennett?" Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. The perfect mother looked suddenly small, her expensive clothes unable to hide the void where her presence should have been. The courtroom scene served as the ultimate proof. Beauty is a mask, and wealth is a tool, but character is the foundation. When the judge finally ruled, he didn't look at bank statements or social registers. He looked at the woman who knew the boy's fears, and the man who had finally learned to face them. Maya walked out of that courtroom with no more money than she had entered with, but as the boys ran to her, nearly knocking her over with their embrace, it was clear who the richest person in the room truly was. Substance had won the day, proving that showing up is the only credential that truly matters in the eyes of a child. The Bennett mansion was a masterpiece of glass and steel, a monument to the absolute power of its owner, Elias Bennett. In the city of Houston, Elias was a titan. He could move markets with a single text and end careers with a nod. He had reached the summit of the world, but inside the cold, echoing rooms of his home, he was losing. His twin sons were a rebellion he couldn't quash, and his life was a sequence of high-stakes meetings designed to drown out the silence of his hollow chest. To the world, Elias had everything. To Maya, when she first walked through those heavy oak doors, he looked like a man starving in a palace. This was the family reversal. On paper, the power dynamic was clear. Elias held the keys, the bank accounts, and the authority. Maya held a mop and a one-page employment contract. She was the one with the least power, a woman who lived in a small room in the service wing. Yet, as the weeks unfolded, it became clear that the billionaire was the one in debt. And the housekeeper held the only currency that mattered. The shift began in the small hours of the morning. Elias would often find himself in the kitchen, unable to sleep, staring at his reflection in the dark windows. One night, Maya was there, quietly preparing the dough for the next day. "You have a world of people who say yes to you, Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice calm and steady as she worked. "But you don't have a single person who tells you the truth." Elias stiffened. "I pay for truth, Maya." "No," she replied, looking up. "You pay for compliance. Truth is free, but it's expensive to hear. The truth is, you're afraid of those boys because they look like the woman who broke your heart. So you treat them like a business problem to be managed instead of sons to be loved." The billionaire, a man who had intimidated senators, was silenced by a woman who had just finished scrubbing his floors. In that moment, the power shifted. Maya wasn't speaking from a place of wealth. She was speaking from a place of moral clarity. She was saving the man who thought he had already saved himself. The justice reversal reached its peak during the house's darkest hour. When the legal battle for the boy's future intensified, Elias's money couldn't buy the loyalty of his sons, and his prestige couldn't fix the damage of his absence. He was powerless in his own home. It was Maya who stepped into the gap. She didn't use lawyers or leverage. She used the family she had quietly built while Elias was in boardrooms. She brought them all to the dinner table, the place that had been a battlefield for years. She sat Elias down, not as the boss, but as a father. She sat the boys down, not as burdens, but as children. And she sat with them. "This table is the only territory that matters," she told them. "You can fight the world outside, but in here, you belong to each other." By bridging the gap between the Titan and the twins, Maya performed a miracle that no amount of venture capital could achieve. She took a billionaire, who was a stranger in his own house, and turned him into a man who knew how to stay. The reversal was complete. The person with the least power had become the architect of their future. Maya had saved the billionaire from his own success, and in doing so, she had forged a real family from the wreckage of a broken empire. The mansion was still made of glass and steel, but it was no longer cold. The power had moved from the bank vault to the dinner table, and for the first time in his life, Elias Bennett was truly rich.